us suspect, because this was thought to be a good time to bury bad news. Mr. Speaker, the forecast for growth is down, for borrowing costs is up, for inflation is up, and business confidence has been smashed in a million pieces. This Chancellor constantly trying to blame forces beyond her control. The right response is not to duck responsibility, but to build a resilient economy. The Right Honourable Lady would have us believe that that is what she is doing. But how can we believe this Chancellor? How can we trust this Chancellor? She is the Chancellor who said she would not increase borrowing, but she did. She said she wouldn't change her fiscal rules, but she did. She said she wouldn't put up national insurance, but she did. She said she wouldn't cut winter fuel payment, but she did. She said she wouldn't tax farmers, but she did. And she said she would not move to more than one fiscal event a year, and she just has. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises. Today's numbers confirm it. We are poorer and we are weaker. To govern, Mr. Speaker, is to choose. And this Chancellor has made all the wrong choices.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
OK, well, I know that the Chancellor hasn't been in this role, Sarah Chancellor hasn't been in this role for very long, but I mean, at least he's not misquoting Shakespeare today. If this was a budget, then it would be the Leader of the Opposition responding. Now, I'm glad that she's still in her place. I know that she'll want to get back to her office for a lunchtime steak soon. But the Right Honourable Gentleman, he talks about budgets. Let me remind the party opposite that the only emergency budget we have seen in recent years was in response to the party's disastrous mini-budget. A mini-budget that crushed the economy, sent mortgage bills spiralling and left a £22 billion black hole in our nation's finances. Now, they might have forgotten about the damage that they did to our country, but the British people never will. But as always, the Shadow Chancellor talked a lot, but he didn't offer a single alternative. He says he opposes our tax rises, but he can't tell us whether he would cut the NHS to reverse them. He says he wants economic growth, but they abstained on the very planning reforms that the OBR have said will kick-start growth. Now, Mr. Speaker, you don't change the country by abstaining, by sitting on the fence. You change the country by leading, by taking action, and that is what this government are doing. And Mr. Speaker, he says he wants businesses to trade, but he doesn't want us to talk to the second largest economy in the world, or indeed our biggest trading partners in the European Union. He simply isn't serious. 4 months into the job and he's got no clue. He wants to talk about growth, but he doesn't say anything about the fact that the OBR has upgraded growth next year and every single year after. He talks about pensioners, but he forgets that it's his party to scrap the triple lock, which we are protecting and which will mean the state pension rising next month by over £400. And Mr. Speaker, he talks about wages, but he forgets the fact that we are boosting wages by boosting the national living wage from next month. And, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor says nothing about living standards or this morning's fall in inflation, because the last Parliament was the worst on record, and the OBR today have revised up their forecast for family finances. Mr. Speaker, working people are always better off with Labour. Now, he is learning something, because at least this time he's asked a couple of questions, so let me respond to them. He asked what should the markets make. Well, what the market should see is that when I've been tested with a deterioration in the headroom, we have restored that headroom in full. That's the choices that I made. And he says that it's a slither of a headroom. Well, it's 50% more headroom than I inherited from the party opposite. When I was left with a slither of headroom, I rebuilt it after this government, last government, eroded it. That is the difference that we've made. And whilst they left the public finances and the public services a mess, we wiped the slate clean, which means we have the flexibility now to increase defence spending, as we have done in the, as the leader of the Labour Party has done. The party opposite had 14 years to increase defence spending, and now they lately come to the party. And the Shadow Chancellor mentions welfare reform and his time at the Department for Work and Pensions. What a legacy. 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training. 1,000 people a day going on to personal independence payments. And the OBR say today that welfare spending as a share of GDP will now start falling, a far cry from what we had under the party opposite. And, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor speaks about employment. Well, the OBR say that employment will increase, that wages will increase and that living standards will increase. What a change after 14 years of the Conservative Party. Well, the world is changing and no one can be in any doubt about it. But the Conservative Party are stuck in the past, divided, out of touch and carping from the sidelines. They have no plan. No plan to kickstart growth, no plan to fix our public services, no plan to keep our country safe. The only plan for change they are working on is to change their party leader, and you can't blame them for that. So if they have no plan, let me remind them about ours. The minimum wage up, real wages up, house building up, NHS investment up, investment in our schools up, investment in our roads up, defence spending up. Every single one of those policies opposed by the party opposite. Opposed by the Conservatives, opposed by Reform, opposed by the SNP, opposed by the Liberal Democrats and opposed by the Greens. Mr Speaker, it's the anti-growth coalition in action. They are the blockers, we are the builders, securing Britain's future, protecting working people and delivering change.
Chair of the Finance Committee, Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend inherited a very difficult challenge when she became Chancellor of the Exchequer last July. And she is absolutely right that the books need to balance. This is not other people's money we're spending, but taxpayers' money hard earned by our constituents, and she is right to be tough as Chancellor on this. We look forward to quizzing her at the Treasury Select Committee next week. I'm sure she's looking forward to it as much as we are. Mr Speaker, the Chancellor announced an extra £2 billion a year in capital spending, and she talked about extra defence spending. Can she give some more detail about where she hopes that £2 billion a year extra will go?
Yes, definitely. Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I indeed look forward to attending the Treasury Select Committee next week. I was pleased to have served on the Treasury Select Committee in the past, and it's a pleasure to give evidence to you. We will set out in the spending review, my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will set out in the spending review the allocation of the additional capital money, but I was able to announce today £2.2 billion into defence from next year, as well as £2 billion as a down payment to build the affordable and social housing that we need. Two examples of the priorities of this government to get Britain building and to secure our national security.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The people of this country are crying out for change, but they feel they're just getting more of the same. Of course, it was the Conservative Party that wrecked the public finances, but we are 8 months into the new government, and people are left wondering, where is the change that was promised? The Chancellor says that the world is changing, so why won't she change course with it? The Chancellor said she wanted a dash for growth, but with her national insurance jobs tax, she shot herself in the foot before she even crossed the start line. After the government's disastrous budget, the government had the chance today to change direction, to fix our finances, to kickstart growth and deliver a small business budget. The government could have scrapped the jobs tax, which will hammer our high streets, and instead asked the big banks, the social media giants and the online gambling companies to pay their fair share instead. And the government could have changed its approach to trade, launching talks to boost growth with a new trading deal with our European neighbours. Instead, the government has made the wrong decisions to cut public services, hit disabled people and inflict more pain on our small businesses and high streets. In doing so, they have delivered no change and almost no growth at all. After years of Conservative mismanagement, people can see just how broken our public services are. They can't see a GP, they can't see a dentist, they're fighting for an education plan and they are picking up the pieces of a broken social care system. Everything is broken, nothing works. That is why people are impatient for the change that they were promised. We have to bring the welfare bill down and support more people into work. It's right for people and our economy, but cutting support for someone who needs help getting dressed and washed in the morning isn't just wrong. It does absolutely nothing to support that person into work. And if anything, it does the exact opposite. It will also have knock-on impacts for the entitlements of their family carers too. So will the Chancellor come clean about this? If the government is serious about cutting welfare spending, it must get serious about fixing health and social care. So will the Chancellor speed up the social care review and ensure that it concludes no later than the end of this year? And in her quest to slim down the civil service, I wonder why the Chancellor has not looked at the mountain of red tape created by the last government's terrible trade deal with Europe. A whopping 2 billion extra pieces of paper have had to be completed by businesses since Brexit, enough to wrap around the world 15 times. If we manage to cut the red tape, we can give British businesses a tailwind. We can deliver far more growth than is currently predicted. We can increase the fiscal headroom to deal with global headwinds, and we can free up precious time and money in our civil service. That would be real change. Madam Deputy Speaker, business was promised change too, and today's statement should have been a small business budget. We Liberal Democrats have repeatedly raised the alarm about the impending damage from the National Insurance jobs tax, the bigger business rates bills and changes to reliefs for family farms and family businesses. These changes will be a hammer blow to small and family businesses, leaving communities facing the prospect of an epidemic of boarded-up shop fronts. And there'll be a hammer blow to community health and care providers who stop our NHS from falling over. This isn't the change that was promised. So instead, I say again, the Chancellor should look again at much fairer ways to raise the tax revenue our public services desperately need, by reforming capital gains tax more fairly and asking the big banks, the social media giants and the online gambling companies to pay their fair share. I know that the Chancellor must contend with President Trump's trade war, which is causing global economic turmoil. But our response to Trump's bullying cannot be to cower in the corner and just hope that he's nice to us. We cannot sit on our hands whilst British steel is hit with Trump's tariffs. We Liberal Democrats warmly welcome the Chancellor's move to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. But instead of cutting the aid budget, which abandons the world's poor and damages our soft power, she should instead be covering the cost by raising the digital services tax, handing the tab to Elon Musk and Trump's other billionaire backers. At the very least, Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Chancellor categorically rule out any reduction in the tech tax in an attempt to appease the White House, especially when disabled people in Britain face eye-watering cuts? To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have a series of questions. Will the Chancellor recognise that cutting public services that are already stretched is a false economy? Will she accept that trying to bring down the welfare bill without fixing health and social care is a road to nowhere? Will she listen to the warnings from small and family businesses that her jobs tax will do more harm than good? Will she look at the fairer ways of raising revenue that we Liberal Democrats have put forward? And will she take the bold action we need to grow our economy by rebuilding our broken trading relationship with Europe? Madam Deputy Speaker, the public were promised change. Where on earth is it?
Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady says, where is the change? Well, let me tell her. More money into our NHS with 2 million additional appointments and waiting lists falling 5 months in a row. We're rolling out breakfast clubs in primary schools from April this year. We're increasing defence spending to protect us in a more uncertain world. Additional support for carers, a living wage up, the Employment Rights Bill, and so much more. That is the difference we've made in 9 months, and we've only just got started. Now, the Honourable Lady talks about trade. Well, we believe in free trade. We are a small, open trading economy, and we benefit with trade links around the world, including with our single biggest trading partner, the United States of America. And it is right that we work with our allies in the United States to ensure that that free and open trade continues. That is in our national interest, and this government will always act in our national interest. At the same time, there is going to be a summit, as the Honourable Lady knows, between the UK and the EU in May, where we look to reset our relationship so that we can see more free trade and the better flow of trade, especially for our smaller businesses to be able to export around Europe. Now, the Honourable Lady talks about welfare. Well, the Honourable Lady has not admitted that there is a single problem in the welfare system as it exists today. Now, I'm not willing, this party is not willing, to write off 1 in 8 young people who are not in education, employment or training. It's why, for example, we have just announced this week with my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, an additional 60,000 training places to train people up in the construction industries of the future, and a £1 billion package of personalised targeted support, because there are many disabled people, and the Honourable Lady knows this, who are desperate to work but aren't getting the support, were denied the support by the last government. And that's why we have said that there will be additional support for the most sick and disabled, and that personal support for getting people back into work. And that is the right approach, so that we have protections for those who need it, work for those who can, and a sustainable system that is here for generations into the future. But I do want to take on the main point that the Honourable Lady makes, because the Honourable Lady wants all the money for public services, but she doesn't want to raise the taxes to pay for them. The tax, at the moment we spend £105 billion a year on interest on government debt, and it seems that the Honourable Lady would just like more of that debt. She says you can't see a GP, you can't see a dentist. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, how does the Honourable Lady, how do the parties opposite think that you pay for those things? You can't object to the tax increases and support the money that we've invested in our public services. And to say otherwise, I'm afraid, is fairy tales and the magic money tree. It just does not add up. The difference on this side of the House is that we will put money into our public services, explain where it comes from, and ensure that the public finances are on a firm footing. And that is the difference between our party and the parties opposite.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Young people in my constituency, indeed across the country, have had an incredibly difficult time growing up. Austerity saw their further education budgets cut by 14%, then a pandemic, now war in Europe. So can the Chancellor please set out how her plans to get Britain building again will help my constituents, my young constituents, get the good non-graduate jobs they need in Loughborough, Shepshed and the villages?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the honourable member, my honourable friend, speaks powerfully on behalf of his constituents in Loughborough. The additional homes, the 1.5 million homes that this government is building, will ensure that families in Loughborough have a chance of getting on the housing ladder, and young people in Loughborough will have the opportunities to help build those homes. That is the difference that we are making: more jobs, paying decent wages, more homes for our families.
Glenn. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that the Chancellor next Wednesday in front of the Treasury Select Committee will reiterate her commitment not to come back with more tax increases. But could I turn to the OBR page 5, 1.2, where it says, while the government's planning reforms deliver a modest boost to the level of potential output of 0.2% in 2029, its cumulative growth between 2023 to 2029 is still 0.5 percentage point lower than we projected in October. And the level of productivity is 1% lower. I'd like to know what the Chancellor thinks about that, and can she confirm that the Employment Rights Bill has not been evaluated by the OBR?
Well, the key point that the right honourable gentleman says there is that from 2023 to the end of the forecast, cumulative growth is lower. But of course, this government didn't come into power in 2023. We came into power in July 2024. And what the OBR numbers show, that the economy is bigger because of the changes that we've made. It's just a difference of the dates. I look forward to coming to the Select Committee next week, and I'm sure I'll take more questions from the honourable gentleman then.
Yuan Yang. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has rightly championed economic stability in stark contrast to the previous government, indeed in stark contrast to the previous 5 Chancellors. Yet, as she has said, the world is becoming more unstable, and that global instability feeds through to rapid changes in official projections, which can constrain our room for action. Can the Chancellor reaffirm to us that despite these challenges, she will keep her focus on fiscal stability to meet the long-term missions of this government, to defend our country, to improve living standards, and to protect the most vulnerable in our society?
Chancellor.
Thank you. My honourable friend is absolutely right that her constituents, all of our constituents, depend on economic stability. It ensures they know how much they're going to pay on their rent and their mortgages. It ensures that they're not caught out when they go to the shops by prices constantly rising. And that's why, as a government, we've said to grow our economy, the number one thing that we need to achieve is economic stability. And that's why I'm so pleased that the Bank of England have been able to cut interest rates 3 times since the general election, and also that the OBR forecast that inflation will fall rapidly to 2.1% next year and then 2% in the years after that.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, schools face imminently a huge rise in costs due to the rise in national insurance contributions, and they had been reassured by the government that head teachers have been reassured that the schools will be recompensed with money to cover the national insurance costs. Yet Sir Robert Patterson School in my constituency, a great school, finds itself £33,000 short. Will the Chancellor commit to ensuring that Sir Robert Patterson, and indeed all the schools in my constituency, are given enough money to cover her jobs tax?
Well, public services, including schools, have been compensated for the increase in national insurance, and I'm happy for the honourable lady to get in touch with me or the Education Secretary to set out the case of that school. But the only reason we've been able to put record investment into our schools is because the stability of return to our economy, including the tax increases that we had to bring forward last year to provide that extra money for our public services, including schools, in the honourable lady's constituency.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I recognise the difficulties that my right honourable friend is facing in terms of fiscal challenges and so on. That she inherited, and I also support the reforms that my right honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, has set out. But all the evidence is pointing to the fact that the cuts to health and disability benefits will lead to increased poverty, including severe poverty, and worsened health conditions as well. So how will making people sicker and poorer help in terms of driving our economy up and then people into jobs?
Chancellor.
Well, as my honourable friend knows, in the Green Paper we're consulting on a premium payment for the most severely sick and disabled, because as a government we believe that those people who need support should get it. But like the honourable lady, I recognise that there are many people who are sick and disabled. There are many young people who could be working but were written off by the previous government. And that's why we're putting record investment in helping get those people back to work with guaranteed, personalised and targeted support. And you are half as likely to be in poverty if you are working, if you move from welfare into work. And we're determined to lift people out of poverty by ensuring that there are good jobs, paying decent wages, with the security that's guaranteed through the Employment Rights Bill.
Bobby Dean.
The OBR have said that the package of welfare cuts, the information they received was late, with insufficient detail, and the estimates are highly uncertain. They're saying they're now going to have to certify them in the next forecast. So can the Chancellor confirm whether that means that the government have to go further with even deeper cuts to welfare than they've announced so far today?
Chancellor.
What the OBR have done is they haven't taken into account any of the package of measures to get people back into work, or looked at any behavioural effects of people making that switch into work. And what they've said in that document is that they're now going to spend the summer looking at the entirety of the package, including the efforts that we are making with a huge package to get people back into work. I'm confident that that personalised, targeted support will get more people into work, lift lift them out of poverty so they can support their families, and so as an economy we can benefit from their contribution.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fiscal responsibility, unlike with the last administration, ensures that people are paying less and it keeps the cost of living down. However, as a Labour Party, we've got an additional responsibility around having social responsibility. So can we look at those DWP changes again? Of course, protecting the most vulnerable, but it's those people just above that bound which are set to lose, and we're really worried about those.
Councillor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I share the deep concern of all of us on this side of the House. In fact, I think everyone in this chamber shares the concern about the most sick and disabled who need support, which is why in the Green Paper we're consulting on an additional premium payment to the most severely disabled, but also, instead of writing people off and not providing the support they need to do a job that matches their abilities and their needs, that we're giving that personalised target support. And I was in a job centre in my own constituency in Pudsey last week, where there are amazing stories of work coaches helping people into work who are far from the labour market. We want to see more of that to lift people out of poverty, to help them achieve their potential.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the general election, the Chancellor promised growth and no increase in taxes. But as Chancellor, she has delivered no growth and a record increase in taxes. And now the Office for Budget Responsibility is halving her growth forecast this year, cumulatively 0.5% less over the forecast period. And more worryingly, they are also forecasting a 1% reduction in, over 1% reduction in productivity growth. Why does she think that is?
Chancellor.
I've got a huge respect for the honourable lady, but that question doesn't do her justice. As I said to the right honourable gentleman earlier, yes, if you start in 2023, cumulative growth is lower, but the general election didn't take place in 2023. It took place in 2024. The economy is bigger at the end of this Parliament than the OBR forecast previously. Those are the numbers, those are the facts. That's the difference that this Labour government are making.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to congratulate the Chancellor on her excellent statement, which addresses the challenge the last government left her with. Madam Deputy Speaker, to drive growth across the UK, new heavy and light rail infrastructure is badly needed. So what work is the Chancellor doing to develop new models of funding in order to deliver these important projects?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And one of the reasons that we've put an additional £13 billion into capital spending over the forecast period is that we can then invest in the infrastructure that our country needs, including in transport infrastructure, which I know the honourable lady, as chair of the Select Committee, has a keen interest in. And she's absolutely right that we do need to look more at how we can leverage in private sector funding for a whole range of projects, including the Lower Thames Crossing.
Chris Coughlin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to declare an interest as an alumni of London Business School. The Chancellor will recall on the Treasury Committee in November that I asked her to look at a specific London Business School paper on using defence spending, specific public R&D on defence spending to boost economic growth. I was delighted to hear that the Treasury did evaluate that specific paper by Professor Paolo Saruco as part of the spring statement, and has listened to me and the Liberal Democrats. So does the Chancellor agree with me that using defence spending focused on public R&D can be one way not only to keep us safe, but also to raise productivity and boost economic growth?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and I look forward to taking more questions from him at the Select Committee next week. When I've been to visit defence companies or met our armed forces, they tell me about the amazing ability that new technology and innovation has to help them do their jobs better in keeping our country safe. And so as we invest more in defence and get to that 2.5% of GDP, it is absolutely right, as I've set out today, that more of that money is used for innovation, R&D and new technologies.
Zubair Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Congratulate my right honourable friend on grasping the challenges and the opportunities that this new world presents us. Opportunities that will mean that in my constituency of Glasgow South West there will be more investment into the defence sector. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that is timely, because after 18 years of SNP government, 1 in 6 people in my constituency are economically inactive. Will my right honourable friend agree with me this investment will finally raise their ambitions and raise their pay packets?
Chancellor.
Well, unlike the SNP, the Labour Party supports investment and jobs in the defence sector in Scotland that support people in Glasgow and South West and in many other parts of Scotland. More good jobs for young people, more jobs paying decent wages, keeping our country safe. That's what this party believes in. It's a shame the SNP believe in something entirely different.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A cloud hangs over the economy in northern Lincolnshire at the moment, with the potential for significant job losses at the Scunthorpe Steelworks. In view of that, could the Chancellor give an assurance that funding will be available not only to look after any redundant workers, but also to attract new business and retraining for existing workers?
Chancellor.
At the general election, we set out our plan for a steel fund as part of the National Wealth Fund. I absolutely understand the concern of the honourable member and other honourable members in the House about the future of the steel industry in this country. We were able to improve the deal for Tata to protect more jobs in South Wales. We want to have a thriving steel sector right across the UK, and we'll continue to work with the company and with the trade unions there to achieve just that.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Making cuts instead of taxing wealth is a political choice, and taking away the personal independence payments from so many disabled people is an especially cruel choice. A disabled person who can't cut up their own food without assistance, and can't go to the toilet without assistance, and can't wash themselves without assistance will lose their personal independence payment. So hasn't the government on this taking the easy option of cutting support for disabled people, rather than the braver option, which would be to tax the wealthiest through a wealth tax?
Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing progressive, there is nothing Labour about not supporting people who are disabled and sick and young people to do jobs that are commensurate with what they are able to do. And 1 in 8 young people have been effectively written off by the party opposite, and we're not willing to leave them in that position. And we are consulting in the Green Paper on an additional premium to pay to the most sick and disabled, because we recognise that people need support from the state, but too many people are not given the opportunities to fulfil their potential, and we're not willing to carry on like that. In the budget last year, we got rid of the non-dom tax status, we increased capital gains tax, we introduced VAT on private schools, and we changed the rules of inheritance tax. So I don't recognise what the honourable gentleman says.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor tells us the world has changed, and if that's true to allow her to stick the boot into disabled people, it must also be true then to allow her to review her income tax rates, perhaps commensurate with those existing in Scotland, which saw the Scottish economy grow in January by 0.3%, while the UK contracted by 0.1%. She could also choose to revise the government's position on reaccessing the single market in the European Union, which would allow a 30 billion recurring return with no compensation required, or a 1% tax on assets over 10 million. A wealth tax, as one of our backbenchers has just highlighted, 40 billion recurring every year with no need for compensation. If she's got the disabled, the WASPy women, pensioners and hospices in her crosshairs, why can she not tap up multi-millionaires for a few quid?
The world has changed, and we can see that all around us, which is why our defence is more important than ever. That's why it's so astonishing that the SNP continue to oppose the nuclear deterrent.
Preet Gill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I commend the Chancellor on her statement. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the party opposite doesn't understand the link between their total failure to get houses and infrastructure built that our constituents desperately want and the economic constraints that we are facing today?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she speaks powerfully on behalf of her constituents in Birmingham. We need to build the homes that all of our constituents are crying out for. The level of home ownership had declined under the previous government, and we're determined to turn that around, as well as building the affordable and social housing that our country needs. And as we build those homes, more good jobs for young people with pride in their work, good jobs paying decent wages, backed by the increase in the national living wage and our employment rights bill.
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Her Transport Secretary failed to stand up to the transport unions. Health Secretary failed to stand up to the health unions. Her Work and Pension Secretary failed to stand up to the backbenches of her own party. Her savings are predicated on getting rid of a whole tranche of civil servants. How can we have any confidence that she or the Prime Minister will stand up to the civil service unions?
Today, as part of the Transformations Fund, we've set aside £150 million next year for redundancy costs for a voluntary exit settlement, showing how serious we are about reducing the size of the civil service after it increased to record levels under the party opposite.
Michelle Strobin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Communities like mine in Barrow-in-Furness feel more acutely the failures of the previous government. They've left Barrow-in-Furness in a dreadful state. Does the Chancellor agree with me that it's through this government's commitment and funding towards Barrow-in-Furness and our defence sector that we will change things transformationally on the ground in Barrow and mean that Barrow can be a blueprint for how the defence pound can be better spent across our constituencies?
I know that my honourable friend is incredibly proud to represent Barrow-in-Furness and that her constituents are incredibly proud to work on our nuclear deterrent, and this government will always stand with them with our new plan for Barrow, for new jobs, new investment in the town, so we get value for money for taxpayers, but also, most critically, we ensure our country's national security.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor was right to highlight productivity as an issue, and right too to focus on skill shortages, although she didn't explicitly note the implicit link between them. She failed, however, to say that her productivity ambitions have been scaled back and that the number of NEETs, young people not in education, employment, training, that she noted, is growing, actually. So will she set out, perhaps in a further note, note in the Library of the House or a statement, by how much she expects apprenticeships to grow year on year? When I was Minister, it reached the highest level in modern times, and the number's much lower now. So we need to grow apprenticeships, to make skills, to grow productivity. Will she do that? For if she doesn't, people will feel that hope exceeds expectation.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and I know he speaks powerfully about something he knows a huge amount about. Let me just answer three parts of that question. First of all, the OBR do revise up productivity in their forecast. Secondly, on young people not in education, employment or training, it's a massive problem, 1 in 8 young people. The OBR, as I said in the answer to a previous question, haven't taken into account the impact of our Back to Work programme. They're going to work on that over the summer with the DWP and the Treasury, because we want to make sure that we design that in a way that gets as many young people back into work, contributing to the economy, contributing to our society. And we were able to announce just a couple of weeks ago in National Apprenticeship Week an expansion of the apprenticeship programme, particularly with foundation apprenticeships, relaxing some of those requirements about maths and English, because if we want to build the homes that our country needs, we need to get people into those construction jobs and not say, I'm sorry, you didn't get a grade C in maths and English, you're not welcome on the construction site. That makes no sense at all, which is why we're reforming how apprenticeships work to get more people with the skills they need to make a contribution to their families and the economy. We want those numbers going up.
Joanna Baxter, she'll be followed by Steve Darling. Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our fiscal rules were designed to ensure that we didn't repeat the damaging austerity of the party opposite, which harmed my constituents so much. Does my right honourable friend agree it's only because of those fiscal rules that the OBR have today confirmed that people in Paisley and Renfrewshire South will be on average £500 a year better off with this Labour government?
Chancellor.
To ensure people are better off, we need to control inflation, which is why stability is so important, bring interest rates down, and the Bank of England have had the confidence to cut interest rates 3 times since the election, and also boost wages, which we're beginning to see with real wages growing, wages growing at twice the rate of inflation. That benefits my honourable friends' constituents and people up and down the country, and that's why we welcome the fact that the OBR today revised up real household disposable income per person by £500.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today and last week, the Chancellor rushed through severe cuts to the benefit system that will hit some of the most vulnerable in our society. Whilst we should have considered benefit reform, this is ill conceived. Can the Chancellor explain to the Chamber why she is choosing to balance the books of the nation on some of the most vulnerable, on the backs of some of the most vulnerable of those in our society?
Chancellor. I have huge respect for the honourable gentleman, but I think everybody in this House and everyone in the country can see that the welfare system is just not working. When you've got 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training, 1,000 people going on to personal independence payments every single day, we can't carry on like this. The basic principles of this government is that people who need support should be protected. Those who can work should work, and we will support them with personalised, targeted support, and that we need a system that is sustainable. That is what the reforms set out by my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, deliver last week, alongside the Green Paper, where there will be further consultation to make sure that those with the most severe need get the additional support that they are rightly entitled to.
We have another 45 minutes. As questions are short, more members will get in. Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's absolutely right that the party opposite devastated our communities and left us with billions of pounds of debt. But it is not right that disabled people and the most vulnerable in our society should pay for that. Thousands of my constituents continue to be fearful about the announced welfare cuts. Disability organisations have warned that hundreds of thousands will be pushed into poverty. So I say to the Chancellor, we must make the right political choice. Protect the most vulnerable in society and introduce a wealth tax so that multimillionaires and billionaires can pay their fair share.
Chancellor.
But my honourable friend represents the constituency that neighbours mine, and he knows and I know that there are far too many people in both of our constituents, in Leeds and Bradford, who are written off. People who are not working, who are quite capable of working if they were given the support. People who may be disabled, it doesn't mean they can't work and contribute if they are given the proper support. And that's what the party opposite failed to do. That's what our government are determined to deliver. And we will work with disabled groups, we will work with job centres, including the one in Pudsey where I was last week, to make sure that we support people to fulfil their potential, not writing them off like the party opposite did.
So, Julian Lewis.
Yes. I welcome the Chancellor's emphasis on defence expenditure and his support for the nuclear deterrent. But does she accept that by his actions in Ukraine, Putin has restarted the Cold War? And will she bear in mind that during the 1980s, up to the end of the Cold War, we were spending regularly between 4.5% and 5% of GDP on defence? That's the sort of scale that's really required.
The honourable gentleman has long been an advocate of spending properly on defence, and that's why we've set out a fully funded and costed plan to get to 2.5% in the next 2 years and then 3% in the next Parliament. The world has changed. We can see that all around us. This government will always put our national security and our defence first, and as the situation evolves, of course, so will we.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for her statement. She's absolutely right to highlight the stimulus that the Employment Rights Bill will bring to our economy. But I respectfully say to her that the impact of the cuts to welfare payments will reduce the incomes of some of the poorest constituents in my Middlesbrough and Thornaby East constituency. And that contrasts with the easy ride that the very wealthy get from lower margins of tax on their assets and gains than my constituents face through income tax. The world indeed has changed since she settled her fiscal rules. So will the Chancellor consider putting capital gains tax on an equal footing with income tax or implementing a wealth tax, which is a 2% rate on assets worth over £10 million to improve the country's finances?
Chancellor.
At the budget last autumn, we increased taxes by £40 billion without asking working people to pay more. We did that by abolishing the non-dom tax status, by increasing the rate of capital gains tax, tightening the rules around inheritance tax, and yes, by asking businesses to pay more as well. So we have already raised taxes to put more money into our health service, reduce NHS waiting lists, and to have free breakfast clubs at primary schools. But what the Spring Statement shows today is that by growing our economy, we can increase the size of the economy through the planning reforms and therefore ensure there are more money for our public services. That's why the #1 priority of this government is growth, and why I'm so pleased today that the OBR say that by the end of this Parliament the economy will be bigger than that we inherited from the Conservatives.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has claimed today that she's building a foundation on the foundations for the economy, but sadly the foundations are foundations of sand, built on increased borrowing, higher inflation, lower growth, jobs, taxes, etc. Can she tell us how these structures will stand against the economic forces which are coming to affect the United Kingdom and she has described today? And specifically, could she tell us what proportion of the Transformation Fund will be available to the Northern Ireland Executive for important transformation of public services in Northern Ireland?
Councillor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. The OBR are really clear that the economy at the end of this Parliament will be bigger than they previously envisaged, bigger than the plans we inherited from the previous government, and the average person with real household disposable income will see their incomes rise by £500. So we're already beginning to deliver the change that we promised. In the budget last year, I was able to announce the biggest ever settlements for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. That continues to be the case after the spring statement today.
John Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Reckless management of public finances leads to higher costs of government borrowing. And as any economist will tell you, that increases the cost of capital across the British economy, putting at risk and increasing this cost of essential investments in housing and infrastructure that my constituents desperately need. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this is a very important reason why it is essential to manage public finances carefully, unlike the last Conservative government, and unlike the government in Scotland, which is over-familiar with emergency budgets?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The importance of robust fiscal rules that, even in difficult economic circumstances, we continue to meet through the decisions that I've set out today. And the reason economic stability is so important is that we saw what happened in the last Parliament, where a government borrowed beyond its means. And the people who lost out were not the wealthy. It was ordinary working people who paid more in the shops, more on their mortgages and more on their rents. This government will never repeat the mistakes of Liz Truss and the party opposites.
Dr. Luke Evans.
The Chancellor's created a storm and now is complaining about the rain. She increased spending to 70 billion, she increased borrowing by 30 billion, she increased tax by 40 billion, and yet the economy shrank in January. Now, she did talk about change and the abolition NHS England. Now, I put a written question in to the department to say how much would this cost. They said there would be some upfront costs, but couldn't specify. So with this top-down change, could she tell me what the estimated cost is of abolishing NHS England?
Chancellor.
It's really difficult to understand what the party opposite want. Do they want to reduce the cost of admin and bureaucracy, or do they want to carry on with everything the way it was? We want to change things, and that's why in the Transformation Fund that I set out today includes £150 million for a voluntary exit scheme, because we want more money on the front line, not in the back office and a bloated bureaucracy left by the party opposites.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there's so much to welcome in today's statement, but the Chancellor will be aware of serious concerns regarding welfare reform. And my constituent told me last week, I'm terrified of what will happen to me if I can't work. I'm already having thoughts of suicide at the prospect of these changes and what they mean for disabled people. Today's impact assessment shows 250,000 increase in relative poverty, 50,000 increase in children living in relative poverty. What will the Chancellor do to stop this from happening?
Chancellor.
Well, the honourable lady speaks about a constituent who is in work, and she, I'm sure, like others, will welcome the work that Charlie Mayfield has done about ensuring that people with sickness and disability can stay in work, because we know that the best place for people is in work for their health, both physical and mental. But we know too often when people drop out of the labour market, they really struggle to get back in. So alongside the targeted support to get people back into work, we're determined to work with businesses to ensure more people with sickness and disability can stay in work, contributing to their family finances and contributing to the wider economy.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Chancellor agree that measuring growth and relative wealth by GDP is not the most relevant number to our constituents? Because we're living in an age of mass immigration and a rising population, it is GDP per capita, surely, that matters to our constituents, and that has fallen consistently for the last 2 years and is falling still. And shouldn't we tell people, actually, they are getting poorer?
Well, the OBR forecast that GDP per capita will increase by 5.6% during the course of this Parliament, having fallen under the previous government. So if he ever gets to Clacton, he can tell his constituents that.
Matthew Patrick.
£3 billion into a transformation fund to sort out how government is run. Does the Chancellor agree with me that this is reform that the Tories ducked, should have done it, didn't do it, and actually their failure to address this put pressure on frontline services and stretched public finances?
Chancellor.
The Transformation Fund, worth £3.25 billion, is about trying to reduce costs further out, the costs of failure. So that's why we're putting more money into recruiting foster carers, because we want to make sure that more children can get the best possible start in life. But we also know that if children end up in poor quality children's homes, that has consequences not just for their lives, but also for other services later in life. It's also why we're putting more money into technology in the probation service, so that we can make sure that probation works better for rehabilitating offenders, but also ensuring that people pay for the crimes that they commit.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor rightly reminded this House in her statement that the British public are watching. And among the British public watching are tens of thousands of the most vulnerable pensioners in our society. Can she please explain to the House what is Labour about removing the winter fuel payment from those having £13,500 a year?
Next month, because of the triple lock which we've been able to protect, the basic state pension, the new state pension, will increase by more than £400. And during the course of this Parliament, because of the triple lock, which the Shadow Chancellor opposes, the triple lock will cost an additional £31 billion. So that's the protection that we're giving to pensioners, as well as record investment into our NHS, which of course older people use with greater frequency than anyone else.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK is the 6th richest country in the world, yet over 1 in 3 children and 25% of adults live in poverty. Since Labour came into power, 25,000 more children have been pushed into poverty due to the 2-child benefit cap. And now, according to the government's own impact assessment, over 250,000 people will be pushed into poverty as a result of these cuts, including 50,000 children. So I asked the Chancellor, who earns over £150,000 annually, has accepted £7,500 worth of free clothing, and recently took freebie tickets to see Sabrina Carpenter. Does she think austerity 2.0 is the change people really voted for?
There's nothing progressive and there's nothing Labour about pouring more money into a broken system. Under the changes that we're bringing about, we're going to help young people who are not in education, employment or training by giving them targeted support. And as I set out in the statement earlier, the OBR so far have not scored any of the Back to Work programme, which is the biggest Back to Work programme that we've seen for many, many years. They're going to do that work over the autumn. But we know that the best way to lift people out of poverty is to get them into good work, secure work, paying a decent wage. We're increasing the national living wage, so it will go up by £1,400 for someone working full-time from next month, as well as the Employment Rights Bill, which ensures that people will have security at work. That's the difference that this Labour government is making.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor knows that our economy has been driven to the edge over the last 15 years, with ordinary people forced to bear the burden while a small minority have amassed extreme wealth. This is something she could change, and her own backbenchers are lining up to argue for a wealth tax. So why won't she do the fair and right thing and introduce a tax on the very wealthiest, rather than launching austerity 2.0 and removing vital support from disabled and ill people?
The best thing that we can do for our constituents is build the homes that they desperately need. And so I really have no understanding of why the Green Party voted against the planning and infrastructure bill this week. What have they got against to get families getting homes and young people getting jobs?
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's defence announcement by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is fantastic news for my city. It delivers security for working people across the country and cements Portsmouth as not just the historic home of the Royal Navy, but the future home. Does she agree with me that after 14 years of the benches opposite, decimating all areas of our armed service, imposing 3 Portsmouth ministers on my city, and axing shipbuilding from our city, it has fallen to this government to once again fix the mess inherited by you, by the people over there. Almost said you lot, sorry. Securing the naval base operation and those serving our country for the future.
My honourable friend is a proud advocate for her city of Portsmouth, and this government is a proud advocate for the people of Portsmouth. That's why we've put investment into the Portsmouth naval base in the spring statement today. As we grow what we spend on defence to keep our country safe and secure, we want to ensure that there are more good jobs, paying decent wages, to make Britain a defence industrial superpower and to support those who serve on the front line.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, the Chancellor could have taken action to reverse the damage that she has done to constituents and businesses in my constituency and beyond, but she's failed. She's chosen not to do so. So what does she say to the pensioners, the farmers, the businesses, the charities, the hospices, and all those hard-working people who now face her huge tax rises?
Chancellor.
When I became Chancellor, I inherited £22 billion, a black hole in the public finances left by the party opposite. And we've taken action to address the hole in our public finances. And what I would say to the Honourable Lady's constituents, and indeed, Right Honourable Lady's constituents, is that when they are waiting for an NHS appointment, they're now going to see a doctor and a nurse quicker than they did under the last government, because NHS waiting lists have fallen for 5 months in a row.
Ron Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the main contrast between this and the last government is strength versus weakness? They were too weak to crack down on wasteful spending, they were too weak to address the tax breaks and loopholes for the wealthy, and they were too weak to take on the blockers in the planning system. So does she further agree with me that as the party of vested interests opposite seeks to conserve what has failed, it will take this Labour government to have the strength to take the tough, long-term decisions to build a better and much fairer Britain?
The OBR today have scored some of the planning measures that we've taken, which will mean that by the end of the Parliament, the economy is £6.8 billion bigger and will contribute £3.4 billion to our public finances and our public services. That's only possible because we are taking on the vested interests and getting Britain building, backing the builders, not the blockers. And we are the government who have increased spending, who are increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. The Tories had 14 years and they failed to do that. We've done that in the first year of this Labour government.
Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Heartbreakingly, last week, St Wilfrid's Hospice in Eastbourne announced many redundancies, citing the national insurance increase as a reason. I've just received a message from Mrs Robinson at Motcombe School, who faces increased costs due to the NIC's hike being passed on from a food catering supplier onto them. Can the Chancellor tell us, if she's not going to increase the digital services tax to fund a reversal of that hike, how those organisations are going to be supported to keep doing the great work that they do?
At the budget, we set out tax increases on the wealthiest and, yes, on businesses to properly fund our public services. And so when constituents in Eastbourne get to see a doctor or a nurse a little bit quicker, when they benefit from the breakfast clubs that we're rolling out, it's because we had the money to do so. So you can't back the increases in investment in our public services if you oppose the money to pay for it, including the settlement for the hospices.
Nadia Whittain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand that this government has inherited a huge financial mess from the party opposite, caused by over a decade of austerity. But what is the justification for cutting disability benefits when especially when a third of disabled people are already in poverty, instead of choosing to tax the growing wealth of the super rich. For example, a 2% tax on assets over 10 million, which could raise 24 billion a year.
At the budget, we set out £40 billion worth of tax increases, including getting rid of the non-dom tax status, increasing capital gains tax, VAT on private schools, and tightening the rules around inheritance tax. We made those decisions so that we could invest more in our public services, including in our schools and our hospitals, and indeed we have now lifted defence spending within the next 2 years to 2.5% of GDP. And on welfare spending, there's nothing progressive about writing off a generation of young people, and that's why our targeted personalised support will help people get back into work, lift them out of poverty and help them contribute both to their family finances and our nation's finances.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady talks of financial responsibility, so could she tell us, please, when government bond yields hit their highest level since the global financial crisis, and who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer then? And if she needs a clue, we can bring her a mirror.
Thank the Honourable Lady for that question. You can see, if you look at financial markets and follow them closely, that the increase in bond yields in the UK, in France and Germany have closely tracked each other. Global financial instability has affected countries around the world, and that's why it's so important that we continue to meet our fiscal rules, as I have set out today.
Rushworth.
The member for Clacton a moment ago mentioned GDP per capita. I see he's asked his question and ran away. The truth is that GDP per capita only increased 4.3% in the past 16 years, compared to 46% in the years prior. What matters to my constituents is not just the growth, but it's the growth that they can feel in their pockets, in the left-behind towns and villages of Bishop Auckland. So what will she do to ensure that working people feel the growth?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this government wants people in Bishop Auckland and constituents across our country to feel the benefits of that growth, with good jobs, paying decent wages in all parts of the country. That's why we are increasing the national living wage. That's why we are making work pay, and that's why we are backing the builders, not the blockers, to create new jobs, new homes for families, new transport infrastructure, new energy infrastructure. And that's why the OBR today say that compared to the plans we inherited, real household disposable income per person is set to rise by £500 by the end of this Parliament, showing the difference that this government is making.
Clarence Meddy. Clarence Meddy, no?
Diolch, Deputy Cyfarwydd. Wales has a higher percentage of disabled people and a large public sector workforce compared to the UK, and so will hit hardest by these cruel cuts. All this damaged by self-imposed fiscal rules. There have been 5 major changes to fiscal rules since 1997. Will the Chancellor now change them so she doesn't impose further austerity?
Have it all.
In the budget last year, we provided the biggest ever settlement for the Welsh Government, and yet Plaid voted against that. I don't understand why the honourable member doesn't want money to go to Wales and to her constituents.
Holly Billington.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for her statement, in particular her recognition of the excellent work of Labour-run Thanet District Council, building more social homes with local firms, employing local people, including local apprentices. The government's recent planning changes mean not only council homes for local people, but also growth. Can she confirm that the Office of Budget Responsibility has only scored the effect of the National Planning Policy Framework changes and not the upcoming Planning and Infrastructure Bill?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I was pleased to note in my statement today that Thanet have already come forward with plans to build affordable housing as part of the affordable housing plan, which I set out more money for in the statement today. What I would say to the honourable lady is that the parties opposite who abstain and vote against the planning bill are voting against homes for our constituents, and they're voting against jobs jobs for our young people. On this side of the House, we back the builders, not the blockers. We back opportunities for young people and families housing for our constituents. It's a shame the parties opposite don't do the same.
Graham Stewart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor claimed that growth was a top priority, yet she's taken the fastest growing economy in the G7 and brought it to a shuddering halt. She promised there would be no tax rises, and next week's jobs tax will put tax rises on ordinary working people. And today she's cut the housing numbers by 200,000 and put up borrowing by £18 billion in the next 2 years. 18 billion. Isn't it time the Prime Minister invited the Chancellor next door and said, Rachel, you're fired?
The plans that we inherited from the previous government saw the OECD forecast the UK to have the slowest growth in the G7 this year. They're now forecasting us to have the second highest growth in the G7. So that is the difference that this Labour government are making, moving us up the league tables.
David Burton-Sampson.
Speaker, and I thank the Chancellor and her team for the prudent work they are doing to restore stability to our economy. And this on top of figures showing that already wages are increasing in my constituency of Southend Western Lee under this Labour government, and inflation is falling. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this, alongside the new living wage worth £1,400 a year, will make work pay and will start to lift more people out of poverty?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was pleased in the budget last year that I was able to announce a 6.7% increase in the national living wage, as well as a record increase in the youth rate of the minimum wage. That will help lift working people, working families out of poverty, alongside our Employment Rights Bill, which will ensure greater security for those who go out to work.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, growth is not on the lips of farmers whose confidence in the government is at a low ebb following the family farm tax, the abrupt closure of SFI and now the possible department cuts that could reduce the farming budget further. Charlie from Upton Bridge Farm in Long Sutton told me he's contemplating leaving his ground fallow due to the risk of a failed crop putting his farm further into debt. So will the Chancellor assure farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton and across the country that following the spending review, the government is still committed to championing British farming whilst protecting the environment?
At the budget, we put record investment into our farming sector after being left plans by the previous government where they did not even use all of their farming budget. We're determined to give farmers the support that they need.
Nestle Chaliska.
Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement? I represent Barking, where she will know has some of the highest figures for deprivation in the country. And 20% of working adults there have no qualifications whatsoever. Does she agree with me that only through getting people the qualifications they need, creating jobs, can they ever improve their life chances?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she speaks passionately about expanding opportunities for her constituents in Barking. The changes to the apprenticeship levy and the growth and skills levy is about ensuring that more people, including her constituents in Barking, can access those apprenticeship courses and those foundation courses. And it's also why just at the weekend we were able to announce an additional 60,000 places on construction courses to help people get jobs that pay a decent wage and offer security, which is what this government is all about.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the Chancellor chose not to mention Chagos in her statement, and given that she chose not to answer the Shadow Chancellor's question on Chagos, can the House now assume that this disastrous deal will not be going ahead, and more importantly, that the UK taxpayer will not be footing the bill?
Well, as the honourable gentlemen know, our Prime Minister and President Trump discussed these issues when our Prime Minister was at the White House recently. We continue to work on those plans. The most important thing is that we protect our national security and can continue to operate out of that important base.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Speaker, point 1.14 in the OBR report outlines that the planned cuts to disability benefits will reduce personal independent payments for 800,000 claimants and cut health-related universal credit for 3 million families. Isn't it time we asked those with the broadest shoulders to carry the heaviest burden rather than the poorest in our society?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I've already set out, the Office of Budget Responsibility in their numbers don't assume any changes in terms of people going back to work. That's what we're going to work on with the OBR, DWP and Treasury over the summer, so that we develop those plans to ensure that people aren't worse off, but they're actually better off because they can progress into jobs that suits their abilities and needs, because we want more people to have the fulfilment of a good job with security that pays a decent wage.
Alex Brewer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a statement with significant problems, I do welcome the Chancellor's commitment to better military homes, which the Liberal Democrats have been calling for. Will the Chancellor clarify how much, by when, and will this include RAF Odium in my constituency of North East Hampshire, or is it just for those constituencies she listed which happen to have Labour MPs?
We support military families wherever they are based in the United Kingdom, and we will set out more detail in the spending review in June. But already in the last few months, we have taken back into the public sector homes that were previously contracted out to the private sector, so we can make improvements to military accommodation, something that I know will be welcomed in her constituency and by military families across our country.
Sarah Coombs.
Deputy Speaker, my constituents in West Brom work hard and pay their taxes, and they want to know that the government treats that money with respect. I'm glad we finally have a Chancellor who is being careful with every pound of taxpayers' money so we can invest in the NHS, which has seen a 10% cut in the waiting list in my area. Can the Chancellor set out how she is drawing a line under the waste and chaos of the previous government and finally putting our public finances back on a stable footing?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she speaks powerfully on behalf of her constituents and ensuring that people in West Bromwich get a good deal from their public services and value for money when they pay their taxes. There was too much waste under the previous government, and that was exemplified during the pandemic when so many contracts went to friends and donors. That's why we've appointed a COVID corruption minister, because we want that money back in our public services, not in the hands of Tory friends and donors.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are 4.3 million children living in poverty in our society. There are 1.2 million people in receipt of PIP who are about to lose it following her statement last week. She's put a huge amount of money into defence. Could she not think for a moment of reversing the decision last week to take £5 billion out of the welfare budget and end the two-child benefit cap, which has driven so many children and families into really desperate poverty?
I'm not going to make any apologies for putting more money in defence. This Labour government takes defence of our country seriously, and so we should. We are the party that created NATO, and under the leadership of the Labour Party today, we will always defend our country.
David Hinzer-Dushinsky.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on her statement and on her action to end austerity, investing £26 billion in the NHS, £3 billion in education, raising defence budgets and unleashing over £100 billion of additional capital investment to build the foundations of our economy. On the day after this government voted through a pay rise to 3 million working people by raising the minimum wage, does she agree with me that it's only by making the tough decisions to restore stability and by pushing ahead with the government's bold plans for reform that we can repair the terrible damage done by the party opposite, deliver strong public services and get more money in people's pockets?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and also all the work that he's doing to back growth, to improve living standards for working people. And I was pleased in the spring statement today to announce £13 billion extra during the course of this Parliament for capital spending, because we know that the easy choice that the previous government made was always to cut capital spending, which is why we're in the mess today that we are, because of the deterioration of infrastructure. We won't make those short-term decisions. We will invest to grow our economy, working with business to do so.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's trouble is while her manifesto promised to limit spending increases to £9.5 billion a year, her budget's increased spending by £76 billion a year, 8 times as much. She's previously said she will not come back asking for more tax rises or more borrowing. So will she rule out both in the budget later this year?
The budget in the autumn last year wiped the slate clean after the 14 years of economic mismanagement by the party opposite. We won't have to repeat a budget like that because we're not going to inherit anything like that ever again, because we've changed the rules so that the OBR always now get information rather than it being hidden like it was by the previous government.
Owen.
No, Jones.
Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for St Albans, gave examples of alternative taxes to Labour's national insurance increases, asking that big banks, social media giants and online gambling companies to pay their fair share of tax. Can the Chancellor confirm she has heard these Liberal Democrat alternatives and explain why she isn't listening to these fair and sensible proposals?
One thing that is scored in the OBR document actually today is the gambling levy that this government has already introduced, and that money will be used to make sure that we regulate gambling properly in our country, and rightly so.
Gregor Poynton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, for defence companies in Scotland, UK Export Finance plays a crucial role in financing sales to our allies around the world, including Ukraine. Can the Chancellor therefore outline how the increase in capacity in UK Export Finance will help defence companies in Scotland create jobs in my Livingston constituency and strengthen our national defence?
Just 2 weeks ago, I was able to announce £2 billion extra for UK export finance, specifically to help defence companies in the UK export. As countries around the world and Europe particularly increase defence spending, I want to make sure that we get those contracts here in Britain to support our proud defence industry, including in places like Livingston and in Rosyth, where I was meeting Babcock just a couple of weeks ago.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's statement referred to people who were listening. The President of the Ulster Farmers Union was actually in the public gallery to hear her statement, which didn't reference agriculture or farming at all. It talked about country security and safety, nothing on food safety. It spoke of writing off the generation of young people. The Chancellor's family farm tax will write off a generation of young farmers. What confidence can the Chancellor give our agricultural sector?
With specific reference to agricultural property relief, unless you have a farm that is worth around £3 million, you won't be paying extra tax. More than 2/3 of farms are not affected at all by the changes in that relief. And if you do pay the tax, it's at half the rate that anybody else pays, and you can pay it interest-free over a period of 10 years. Very different from the inheritance tax bills that anybody else pays.
Mark Ferguson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Chancellor's reference in a recent answer to the £13 billion of additional capital expenditure announced today. So can she put today's statement in the context of the significant investments already made and forthcoming, and contrast it with the last government, who didn't have a plan for long-term growth and abandoned communities like mine?
My honourable friend speaks powerfully on behalf of his constituents in Gateshead, who rely on the infrastructure that our country needs, whether that's energy, digital or transport infrastructure, and in fact the houses that all of our constituents need. In the budget last year, I put £100 billion extra into capital spending during the course of this Parliament, and I've been able to announce an additional £13 billion today. Unlike the party opposite, I'm not willing to cut capital investment, because capital investment is absolutely crucial to grow the economy and to leverage in the private sector investment that we need as well.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor's made much of the government's investment in defence and desire to make the country a defence industrial superpower. I'm keen to pitch for a slice of the protected £400 million for UK defence innovation. Huntingdon is the home of our defence intelligence capability, the US Air Force's Joint Intelligence Operations Centre Europe and the NATO Intelligence Fusion Centre. It has a huge investment in sites like the Alconbury Wielder Enterprise Campus, Brampton Cross and potentially the redevelopment of the MOD land around RAF Whitton as well. Perfect location for defence start-ups, and with the arrival of several already in flight, the US government is investing north of £500 million in Huntingdon alone. So could I ask her to make a similar commitment to Huntingdon and include it in her list of defence sites?
What great pitch. I'm sure somebody from the Ministry of Defence, one of the ministers, would be really pleased to meet with you to discuss those opportunities. As we move to 2.5% of GDP spent on defence and 3% in the next Parliament, I am determined that that money benefits our troops in the UK, but also supports us become a defence industrial superpower. And I'm sure that we can work with the honourable gentleman to realise those ambitions for Huntingdon.
Rosie Writing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite left a £22 billion hole in our public finances, and they continue to oppose every decision made by the Chancellor to clean up their mess. Can the Chancellor tell us how things would look now if the Conservative Party had their way?
Well, what it would mean for people in Kettering and around the country if we had continued under the plans of the previous government is that interest rates would remain high, inflation would have remained high, and growth would continue to flatline, whereas the OBR today forecasts that real household disposable incomes will rise, growth will be higher, living standards higher, because we have returned stability to the economy and we are backing the builders, not the blockers.
Max Wilkinson.
Sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't wish to interrupt the discussion on the front benches. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have another opportunity for the Chancellor. In Cheltenham, we have a scheme that can produce jobs and growth and will support the defence industry. The Golden Valley development next to GCHQ, which will be a key part of this country's defence investment over the coming years. Will the Chancellor take it upon herself to work with ministers and other departments who already know about this to make sure that we get the investment that we deserve and GCHQ workers deserve too?
I'm really proud of what GCHQ do to keep our country safe, and part of what we are doing around the defence budget above the lift to 2.5% is including some of the security service work, because increasingly the work that the security service do is crucial for our national security and defence. Of course, that's on top of the 2.5%, but as we protect defence spending, it is right that we take into account GCHQ and other security agencies as well. And of course, very happy to work with you to ensure that we maximise the benefits for so many constituencies, including in Cheltenham.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement and welcome the increase in defence spending, which represents a huge opportunity for Scottish workers. I was delighted to have her visit Rosyth in my constituency recently. Will she work to ensure a continuous shipbuilding programme in this country to maximise the opportunities for Scottish workers? And does she agree with me that it is utterly shameful that these workers have been ignored by the SNP for the last 18 years? And will she confirm that this Labour government will always value the role of shipbuilding for our economy and our national defence?
I couldn't agree more with my honourable gentleman. It's just a shame that there's no SNP members in the House, although there are so few of them, to hear what he said. Perhaps the honourable gentleman would write to the SNP and ask them why they refuse to back the defence sector in the United Kingdom and specifically in Scotland.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is estimated that in under 5 years, there will be over 3 million families in receipt of disability benefits who will financially lose as a result of today's announcement, with an average loss of £1,720 per year compared to inflation. Is the Chancellor comfortable knowing that she has brought despair and horror to disabled people and their families across the country?
We have a very basic principle that people who deserve to be protected should be, those who can work should, and that we need a system that is sustainable. We don't have any of those three things today, and that's why we're reforming our welfare system, to give additional support for those with the highest needs, to give personalised, targeted and guaranteed support to help people back into work, and to ensure that we've got a system that is sustainable so it is there for generations to come.
Louise Jones.
As the Chancellor will know, the East Midlands is often at the bottom of investment league tables, and indeed we do suffer through a lack of transport planning. Will the Chancellor outline to me, however, how the extra public investment and the National Wealth Fund will change that and deliver for people in North East Derbyshire?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. People in North East Derbyshire will benefit from the additional homes, whether they are able to buy those homes, to rent those homes, or indeed to build those homes, as we expand the number of construction apprenticeships and 10 new technical excellence colleges in construction. And they will also benefit from the increases in real household disposable income, because what we want when the economy grows is to have more money in people's pockets, and that's what the OBR confirm will happen today.
Helen Morgan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, pharmacies like Green End Pharmacy in Whitchurch in my constituency are struggling with the impending hike in employers' national insurance, business rates, and in fact that they don't know what they were being paid for NHS services this financial year, let alone next. Can the Chancellor confirm whether Pharmacy First will be continuing beyond the end of next week?
Well, I'm sure that the relevant health minister would be willing to meet with you to talk about that. But because of the investment that we put into our National Health Service last year at the budget, more than £20 billion of additional funding, we are able to start to rebuild our NHS, reduce waiting lists. Indeed, we have done that now for 5 months in a row.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we secure Britain's role in a changing world, I welcome the Chancellor's focus on defence innovation, and I thank her for referencing my community, Aldershot and Farnborough. We are ready to serve. When it comes to defence innovation, too many small and medium defence businesses in my community struggle to get access to the banking and finance facilities they need, often on the basis of self-imposed ESG criteria. Will the Chancellor join me in welcoming the investors and financial institutions that have responded to the campaign that I am leading with my honourable friend, the member for York Outer, calling on our banks and our fund managers to broaden their approach so that we can defend our country, support Ukraine and fire up our industrial base?
I was pleased to be able to mention my honourable member's constituency in my statement today. As home of the British Army, on behalf of this government, we thank the people of Aldershot and Farnborough for the service that they give our country every single day. And my honourable friend is right to mention the importance of companies in the defence sector, whether they're big companies or small, being able to access finance. That has never been more important than it is today, when we see the threats posed from Putin continue to grow. And so I urge everyone in financial services to do their part to make sure that our fantastic defence startups have the money that they need to grow and help defend our country and our values.
Final question, Jim Allister.
Would the Chancellor better explain how the civil service cuts will translate into the devolved regions and the impact on future block grant allocations? And are there lessons to be learnt from the fact that in 2015 the Northern Ireland Executive had a voluntary exit scheme upon which they spent £700 million and then proceeded to re-engage hundreds of civil service as agency workers? Are there lessons there?
That is a really important point that the honourable gentleman made, and that's why we haven't set a number on the number of the reduction in the size of the civil service and instead have made it an admin target, because what we don't want to see is the number of civil servants fall and then the number of agency workers and consultancies increase. So absolutely this government will learn from failed efforts both of the UK government under the Conservatives and other administrations in the past.
That concludes the statement, and I'll give the House a few moments to settle down before we come to the 10-minute rule motion. Ten-minute rule motion, Anna Geldard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move